Town Meeting Coordinating Committee welcomes you to another of our informational forums, which we hold usually one before each town meeting, not really related immediately to articles that are going to be on the town meeting warrant, but to inform you about background material that would be helpful in understanding articles that you will be seeing in the future, or background generally to issues coming before the town. Tonight we're going to be talking about smart growth in Amherst. And it's an issue that I think a lot of us have heard a little bit about, and we'll be hearing a lot more about. Meeting to make informed decisions as planning articles come before us. I'm Peggy Roberts, Chair of the Town Meeting Coordinating Committee, and our job is really to help town meeting members and the public to work in town meeting in intelligent, informed way, so that you feel that decisions are made with understanding. So tonight we are very fortunate to have 4 speakers who are expert in particular fields of smart growth. And Carol Gray has organized the meeting and will introduce our speakers.
Hello, thank you for coming, and we're delighted to have these very knowledgeable experts in the field of smart growth with us tonight. The first speaker will be Andre LaRue, He is the Executive Director of Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance, a coalition that promotes healthy and diverse communities, protects critical environmental resources and working landscapes, advocates for housing and transportation choices, and supports equitable community development and urban reinvestment. For nearly 5 years, Andre was the Director of Planning and Policy at Lawrence Community Works, where he led...
Change this for you. That only works its way here.
Okay. I'm introducing Andre LaRue, the Executive Director of Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance. Andre has worked with he was the Director of Planning and Policy at Lawrence Community Works, where he led an award-winning community planning and revitalization effort called Reviviendo Gateway Initiative, RGI, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Prior to this, he worked with Massachusetts State Senate President Tom Birmingham, first as a legislative aide and then as Deputy Field Director. As a graduate of Dartmouth College, he also completed 2 years of graduate studies at El Colegio de Mexico in Mexico City, studying urban development and environmental issues. Andre co-authored a Policy Link report in 2007 with MIT professor Lorraine Hoyt called Voices from Forgotten Cities, Innovative Revitalization Coalitions in America's Older Small Cities. So Andre will give us an overview of smart growth in Massachusetts, what other communities are doing, and what the principles are of smart growth. So thank you, Andre. Seat if you would like to, or
it might be helpful to,
okay, sure.
to move those along. Great, thank you for inviting me here today. As Carol mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance, which is a coalition of 7 organizations, longstanding policy groups that have done state reform work around development issues in Massachusetts. Carol, how should I just give you a little signal? Yes. So I have a lot of slides. I'm going to try to go through them quickly. But basically, I'm going to break down my talk into 3 parts. One is some basics around smart growth. Second, I'll talk about the importance of developing and promoting a vision for your community. And then third, I'll touch a little bit on some zoning tools, which I think are interesting. So, you know, in our society nowadays, we've been dealing with a lot, and these are some of the things that we've been struggling with as Americans and as residents of Massachusetts over the last 12 months. And the one thing that pulls them all together, because I think that we're really struggling with how to deal with these things and why are all these things happening at the same time. And I think that one thing that is common underlying all of them is the fact that scarcity. The fact that we live in a society in a time when resources are scarce. The Smart Growth Alliance addresses state policy issues to try to tackle some of the fundamental development issues that we deal with, and that touch on a lot of the issues of scarcity. How do we manage our resources? How do we, our scarce public dollars, our water, our environmental goods, affordable housing, social services, and things like that. How can we package these things more efficiently and more effectively? The Alliance is composed of 7 longstanding policy organizations, 2 environmental groups, 3 housing groups, and a regional planning association, as well as a professional association of planners and architects. And what we do is, this is our mission statement, and as I think Carol read most of it in my bio, and it can be really daunting. What is smart growth exactly? And it quickly becomes a long laundry list of things. And for me, that's not what it's about. We deal with all of those things, but that's not what it's about. It's really about connecting people to place. And just go back a little bit, sure. And whether it's first-time homeowners in Lawrence or a local agricultural entrepreneurship program in Holyoke, or a working farm here in Amherst, or downtown Hyannis and small business districts, or street art in Boston. It's really about connecting all of us to the places where we live. And that looks different across the state. So more specifically, the Alliance seeks to increase the number of places that are walkable, affordable, and have a high quality of life, and to encourage development in sensible locations and to discourage development in not so sensible locations. So Smart Growth 101, this is a typical big development, a subdivision down in South Carolina, which I just threw up there because it kind of shows you the scale of a lot of these things that happen in other parts of the country. But this is what happens. You have hundreds of acres, a subdivision project, and it's all chopped up into pretty uniform pieces. So what Smart Growth would say, if you were to apply a Smart Growth perspective to this, is, well, why don't you conserve much of this as open space and condense the development potential into a much smaller area. So it's compact development, it's increasing development in, density in locations that make sense, as you can see, in adjacent to other already developed areas, as well as the commercial and industrial uses down at the bottom. And some of the rationale for doing things like that not only is to save the open space, but because it's a more efficient use of our public dollars and our private dollars. With fewer infrastructure dollars, you can actually save a lot of money by developing in this way. You need less roads, you need less pipes, you need lots of things. So that just shows you, for example, the conventional development is the bottom is $22 million in this case, and whereas a traditional neighborhood development or the smart growth scenario, the infrastructure costs of a phase 1 would be just $6 million. So, but I've had people say things like this to me: living on a sphere, smart growth is an oxymoron, and this is essentially the anti-growth perspective, and why I think some folks have a reaction against the phrase smart growth. And in my opinion, regardless of phrases, we're not talking about a choice between growth or no growth. We're really talking about a choice between managing our growth intelligently or letting it happen in a haphazard fashion. And I would certainly advocate for the first one. So throughout Massachusetts, we've seen, just to look at one aspect of growth in our state, housing production. Between 1970 and 1985, we added almost 500,000 units of housing to our state. Yet in the subsequent 15 years, we only added about half of that. And yet at the same time, we consumed more land than we did in the previous 15 years. And that's because of minimum lot sizes increased throughout the state. And the average unit upon which a residential a home was built grew exponentially. Basically, it doubled. So this is what your typical 1 unit per acre zoning looks like. This isn't from around here. That's just, I think that's Virginia probably. But it shows you the kind of density that you get when you have this. And really, when you look at it from above, it's not so pretty, and it's not a very efficient use of land. And actually, when you take it to scale, you can really see the impacts on the landscape because you realize that with the same amount of residential units, we're just consuming a vast quantity of our landscape. And yet, other times, many individuals will say to me, well, people want that. They want the large home on the large lot, and that's why we have it. It's the market. It's not the market. In fact, we have skewed the market so much that we're actually working against compact development in many cases. And even this is information taken from the housing boom period over the last few years before it busted. And even during that time, we were whether it was private sector reports or consumer reports or academic research, they all showed that people generally divided in their preferences for housing in 3 pretty equal ways. One was they like a walkable neighborhood, a mix of uses. Secondly, another third of folks liked small, sort of detached single-family houses, but sort of more modest houses on modest lots. And then a third of folks, less than a third, really more like a quarter, wanted the large home on a large lot. But what have we been building? But what we've been building has really been to underbuild the compact development scenario. So in fact, if you look at the housing production numbers throughout our country, you'll see that we have actually overbuilt large homes on large lots 3 decades into the future. What that means is that our country, if we were not to build another large house on a large lot, could meet the demand for that housing product until the year 2030. And yet we've underbuilt the other segments of the housing market. And so what that means is that that's driven this demand for the large home on large lot because that's all there is, and that is largely all we are building in the state, even though our population continues to increase. So these are some examples of what smart growth housing could look like. It could, in the lower left, you could have more dense urban types of apartments or condominium complexes. You could have suburban townhouses. You could have single-family detached homes. These are all examples of smart growth housing. This is what I was referring to, the housing supply by type and preference. So you can see on the large lot, we have overbuilt large lot homes by 22 million in the country. We've underbuilt our small lot homes by 30 million, and our urban or more attached walkable housing stock by 26 million units. Just to go back there. So a few of the myths that surround smart growth are that it has to be big, and it has to be top-down design imposed on the community, and the fact that people don't like experts coming in and saying that, oh, with good design, you can solve all of your community's problems. And I think the smart growth movement, in part, feeds into some of these ideas because it's been dominated since the beginning by architects and planners. And that's and it's really not where smart growth is or should be. It really could be decentralized, democratic, and it's really all about increasing our choice. We want to have choices in the kinds of housing that we have. We want to have choices about getting ourselves around, so the kinds of transportation that we have. So a vision, I'll go through these pretty quickly. And a vision is, in my opinion, the ability to imagine a future that's radically different than present trends. And it's, it's essentially a community asking itself, what do I want this place, maybe where my kids are growing up, where do I want it to, what do I want it to look like 20 years from now? And there are 3 steps to doing that. Create a vision, incorporate it into public policy through a plan and through zoning changes, and then to implement it over time and build a constituency to implement it. So these are some of the reasons why it's important to do so. Provides a sense of direction, it identifies what's important, it builds consensus, creates movement, anticipates long-term needs, it's preemptive, creates a sense of excitement. Saves time, really, so you're not always reacting, you're being more proactive. It creates a picture of the future, and it creates a mandate for how you want development to look like in a town. Altogether, what this really means is that it's trying to get around development. So instead of being reactive, it's about being proactive, and it's really about building the story that you want your community to have, and that story is unique to each location. And people might say, well, what does that matter, creating a story about where you are? It does matter. It matters in so many different ways because government levels at the state and the federal level, they want to support projects and development and infrastructure that tell compelling stories. And you want to have a story that people understand about their community. People understood sort of the hometown communities of yesteryear. They don't understand what is happening with their communities today. What is our community? Is it a suburb? Is it a town? Does it have urban character? You really need to come together and decide what that story is that you want to tell about the community and articulate it. This is just some tools for doing that, some visioning tools that are available. Maybe click through those. So even in places in other parts of the country where sprawl is even more terrible than here, you can retrofit. And part of building this vision is by being able to tell that story and helping people to visualize it in a compelling way. It doesn't have to be high tech. I'm going to run over a few minutes. It doesn't have to be, can you just go back one? It doesn't have to be high tech. It can be done through renderings, sort of paintings or drawings, architectural renderings, and even in a place it can be through branding and bringing people together and public-private partnership, like we did in Lawrence with the Reviviendo Gateway initiative. It was brought mill owners and residents and small business people and municipal folks together, and it was very, very successful in a place that has been dysfunctional for two generations now, in changing the way that community thinks of itself and how it tells its story. And it resulted in literally hundreds of millions of dollars of reinvestment in underutilized areas. And it was for residents as well as for mill owners. It found places that everybody could identify with. So we worked on fixing up the alleyways in Lawrence, as well as redeveloping mill properties. Just a few zoning tools quickly. This is one that I think is very interesting and which may be appropriate for a town like Amherst. Cottage zoning, and this has been used effectively, or starting to be used effectively in the western part of the country. Washington State has pioneered this. And what you see with cottage zoning is essentially saying, well, let's build some more of these modestly sized single-family homes, right? People like their single-family home. Well, you can design and build homes that are very attractive and that are, create a sense of community. There's some shared space, and yet they're designed in such a way to ensure privacy and the kind of amenities that people want nowadays. Our zoning does not allow this at all. You'd get into a huge battle anywhere. And in fact, in Massachusetts, there's down in Easton, in the southeastern part of the state, there's a terrific example of the battle that's gone on around this. A developer wanted to come in, propose some cottage-type housing, and was blown out of the water. Now, they're still working on it, and I think that they're creating a local bylaw and ordinance, but it's better to be on the proactive side of this. If you decide where you want to do this, it can be very, very useful. So just for more information, you can check out some of these sources. The Cottage Company, it's the company that's pioneered a lot of this stuff out in Washington State. The company that's done some of the work down in Easton, the New England Cottage Company, has an interesting website with some frequently asked questions on it. And down in Providence, I don't know of too many architect firms in Massachusetts that do these things right now, although certainly they could do these things. But Daniel Powers Architects down in Providence does some of this stuff as well. And, it's a way of taking existing neighborhoods and introducing, in a way that's sensitive, more housing, more compact housing. I mean, throughout New England, there are almost every town right off of state roads, instead of the sprawl that you see right off of Route 9 or things like that, you go behind, one block behind that, and there are plenty of parcels that could be built in creating pocket-sized neighborhoods to introduce new housing in a very sensitive way, not only satisfying middle-class housing needs, but actually improving the character of your community. And another very helpful document that just came out in this September of 2009 is this document that I'd recommend for you, and you can get it online as well. Essential Smart Growth Fixes for Urban and Suburban Zoning Codes, which is put out by the EPA Smart Growth Office. And what that does is takes about 10 fixes, which again we'll click through very quickly, but show you not only the principles of how to do this, but it says if you want to do it in a modest way, in a moderate way, or in a whole-scale way, how you would go about fixing some of these issues. So I don't need to read them. Yep. And then just to come back to the point that development issues can be very, very divisive, but it's important as a community to come together, tell that story about who you are and where you want to be as a community, and look long-term. Don't just think about 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road. Think about 20 years down the road so that you can build consensus. When you look 20 years down the road and let yourself go, not be constrained by what you feel the present reality is, then you can really build some consensus and some momentum, because you're creating an exciting vision of change. And only unless it's ambitious and exciting do people want to buy into it. Who's going to buy into incremental change? No, nobody, especially if it's zoning. Who wants to do that? So you really have to create a picture of where you're going to go and make it real for folks. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Andre. Our next speaker will be Jessica Allen. Jessica Allen is a senior planner at the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission with a focus on land use and zoning issues. Jessica holds a master's degree in both landscape architecture and regional planning from UMass Amherst. She has 12 years of experience in planning with a particular interest in public outreach and education on technical zoning and land use issues. Jessica played a key role in the development of Valley Vision 2, a regional land use plan for the Pioneer Valley, particularly on the Valley Vision Smart Growth Toolbox. And I'm sure she'll tell us about it. Thanks a lot, Jessica.
I have actually the toolbox, which is running. It's not a PowerPoint. It's interactive, so I might need to go over to the screen to run it, but not quite yet. So hello, my name is Jessica Allen. I'm with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. For those of you who might not know who PVPC is, we're the regional planning agency that serves Hampden and Hampshire County. We service 43 communities in the region. We have a variety of departments. I work in the Land Use and Environment Department. You'll hear from David, who works in the Transportation Department shortly. But we do provide various services for the communities in Hampden and Hampshire County. What I'd like to talk to you about tonight is Valley Vision 2, which is a project that we worked on 2 years ago. I think we started working on it in 2004, and it was completed in 2007. It's our regional land use plan. It was an update, so that's why it's called 2. Valley Vision 1 was 10 years ago. And in this process, we updated data, but we really considered it to be a smart growth plan because we were really trying to focus the strategies in the plan to look at concentrating development in town and urban centers and providing ideas on how to protect environmental sensitive agricultural lands and environmental lands. So there are really 7 components to this whole project. One is the plan itself, which I have copies of if people want it. You can certainly come up and get it. And in the plan, we talk about the costs and the impacts of sprawl. We have a listing of 16 different smart growth strategies that a community can look at and think about. We really thought of this as sort of a menu of items. We weren't saying that every community in the region needs to adopt all 16 of these strategies, but pick and choose from the strategies that make sense for your community. We have our region is varied. We cover Springfield, which is the urban core. the communities in the valley, and then we have communities like Middlefield who are pretty rural and pretty small. So we have a great variety of community character in the region, so we wanted to make sure the strategies could apply to all of those different communities. We have a map that's part of this process as well. It's our future land use map, and what we did is we tried to identify appropriate areas for concentrated development and areas for protection. The methodology that we used in the map was based on some legislation that was recently adopted in Massachusetts called smart growth zoning districts, and it has a very strict criteria of what lands are eligible to be designated as a smart growth district, certain zoning district, which encourages housing at a high density level. So we use that methodology to determine what areas in town would make sense, and we have a regional map, but then we also have maps for each of the individual communities, and we worked with each of the individual communities on that map. We also have the toolbox, which you'll see up on the screen, and I'm actually going to run through this. This is available on our website as well, and I have discs if people would like them at the end of the night. But essentially what this does is it allows the community to be their own citizen planner. It has 30 fact sheets on different smart growth zoning techniques, case studies from around the valley, and model bylaws for all of these strategies as well. The reason that we decided to do this is that the state had actually recently come out with a statewide smart growth toolkit. And when we were talking to some of our member communities about this toolkit, they felt that it was really more appropriate for the eastern part of the state and didn't really apply to the western part of the state and especially the valley communities. So we took it as our charge to try to find examples of smart growth in the region, which was actually not that hard to do. There's plenty of examples in all of the different strategies, and Amherst had plenty that as well. So that was sort of the purpose of the toolkit, was to provide information that people could just print off, bring to their planning board, bring to their select board, and say, here's the strategy, this is how it works. Here's some facts about it, and here's an example of where it's working in the valley, and let's see if we can make it work here as well. And the other big part of this project was having a regional compact. We didn't want this to be a plan that just sat on a shelf. We wanted to make sure that it was being utilized and looked at the local level. Since we live in such a state that allows local bylaws to be developed and it's not really mandated from the state, it's really important that it's coming from the grassroots level. So we went through, we met with each of the communities. We had a formal memorandum of agreement. Essentially what the memorandum of agreement asked was the communities to look at their current zoning and try to make it consistent with the Valley Vision Smart Growth Goals, and also to consider adopting these bylaws at some point. So we had 40 of our 43 communities sign the memorandum of agreement. We also had the Valley Development Council, which was a big part of this plan as well. They were a multidisciplinary group of planners, developers, financiers that helped us develop the plan, but then it has also continued. We meet quarterly with them, and they have been assisting us in actually trying to implement this plan as well. We have a lot of different projects that are going under the VDC. We have pilot projects that we're trying to do, smart growth pilot projects. We have a smart growth design competition going on right now that they are hosting as well. We have a website where all this information is found, and then we also offer free local technical assistance to all of our member communities to help them implement smart growth strategies at the local level, taking elements out of the plan. So those were the 7 different components of the plan. I'd like to show you the toolbox because we did spend a lot of time actually pulling this together, and is it okay if I sit down? All right. I hate to be behind a screen, but it's easier for me to navigate this. Let's see if we can get here we go. So there's essentially 4 different components of this toolkit. There's an introduction to Valley Vision. There's smart growth in your community, which provides 3 different things that are very community specific to all of our member communities. We have the listing of the smart growth strategies themselves and the visualizations. So I'll just click on the introduction first so you can see what is under there. Did it work? Nope. looks like this isn't going to work. Let's see if I can at least get to the smart growth in your community. Okay. So this is sort of the meat of the whole process here. We have 3 different things that are offered under the smart growth in your community. We have growth trends, so we show some very basic data about how land use has changed, how residential acres and commercial acres have changed, how agricultural lands have changed. There's a smart growth community checklist, and this is what we did is we took the 13 strategies that were listed in the plan and looked at every community's their master plan, their community development plan, their open space and recreation plan, and saw if they had listed any of these strategies in their local plans. And if so, and they hadn't adopted it yet, we highlighted it as a strategy that you might want to consider in your community. You have self-identified this as an important strategy in your community, but yet you haven't implemented it yet. So we're just trying to help the citizen planners sort of weed through all of the local plans that they might have that they might not have probably read. We also looked at Commonwealth capital applications, which is a state smart growth checklist to see whether a community had checked off anything that they would consider implementing through that checklist. The reason we had to go through all these different channels is some of the communities haven't had any local planning. so we needed to try to find at least as many different elements as we could look at. We also have some recommendations just from the Planning Commission ourselves and our knowledge of your communities to try to identify some of the strategies. And then lastly, there was a this community-specific evaluation map. So if we go to Amherst, there's a very brief little description about Amherst and its personality, some data on change in acres. And then there's the checklist for the community. Oh boy. All these security things. Here we go. So we designed everything so they'd be very simple PDFs, 2-sided. You could print it out, you could walk it around, you could show people in your community. The first page just explains the process and how it was developed. You'll note that it says April 2007 is the last time we updated these checklists. We're actually received some funding to do an update this year, so hopefully we can update them. But on the back there is a checklist that shows you if it's been identified in your plan, if it's been successfully implemented, it has a check mark already, and if it's something that the community should consider, it's got this little asterisk, and it's got a hyperlink to a fact sheet on that specific strategy. If there's a bylaw associated with it, there's another link that goes straight to that bylaw. The bylaw is developed as a Word document so that you can edit it, you can change it, you can do what you need to do to it. Overall, Amherst is an extremely quote-unquote smart community in comparison to a lot of the communities in the region. You'll see there's a lot of check marks on here. So it's great to see. I mean, there's definitely a lot of different things that the community hasn't yet considered or maybe has considered but just hasn't got to the implementation stage. So I offer this to you as maybe a starting point for ideas of what you can look at for bylaws or concepts that you might want to consider in the community. Let's see if I can get back here. There was also a map that was developed, and I can just see if I can quickly show this to you, see if this doesn't take too long to pull up. But what it does is it shows you in a GIS format areas that were based on this 40R language that was developed by the state, areas that are appropriate for concentrated development and areas that are more appropriate for protection. So there's a legend in here that explains what all these different colors mean. Again, you can take a look at it and you can look at it in a little bit more detail. The bright red are the areas that are vacant lands that have no development on them at this point. The lighter pink are areas that would be appropriate for infill development. And we worked on this map in-house, and then we also met with your town planner and made some changes to the map. So it hopefully is what the planning staff anyway is looking for. The other thing that you should also just note here was I talked about the memorandum of agreement, and we had 40 of the 43 communities that signed the memorandum of agreement. You'll see on this map that Amherst is one of the communities that did not sign the memorandum of agreement. The reasoning behind this is still a little unclear to us as well. I can't give you a specific reason why not. We did meet with the select board on a couple of occasions. They did have some issues with the plan. We made some changes. We made some changes to the map. We went back to the select board, and they decided still not to sign it. They did send us a nice letter saying that they do support smart growth, so it's not that the town is anti-smart growth. It's just that they had some specific issues with the plan that apparently we couldn't address. So just sort of something interesting to note. Oh, I don't want to close all tabs. The other parts, it's gone. That's all right, I can just talk about it. The other two parts of the toolkit is there's visualizations, and we had 3 visualizations. One that looked at sort of a pipe dream Route 9 Hadley. If you got rid of those bigger commercial developments and created a more town center feeling with townhouses and bringing development up to the road, what would that look like? Again, because Route 9 is a state highway, I don't think that will ever happen, but it was nice to dream and just sort of visualize it and look at it. But again, these are just graphics that you can take to your boards and say, look, we want something that looks like this. We also had another visualization that was a traditional neighborhood village, and another that was a mixed-use development, commercial development in East Hampton. It's on Union Street in East Hampton, so it was a visualization of that development into something that's more smart growth looking. So overall, I mean, these are the different components of the Valley Vision Plan. I'd say, overall, Amherst, compared to other communities in the region, is very smart. But there are definitely some things that the community could look at, and they've been highlighted in the checklist. I have paper copies of the checklist if you're interested in picking one of those up before you leave. I have some copies of the toolbox. It also can be found online at pvpc.org, as well as a copy of the plan as well can be found online.
Okay, thanks so much, Jessica. Our next speaker will be David Elvin. David has worked in transportation planning for 19 years. He is the transit planner at Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. He works closely with the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority on route and service planning, environmental justice issues, and rider surveys. He is also involved in the planning effort to improve passenger rail service in the Pioneer Valley. Before joining the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission in 2008, David worked on the Urban Ring Bus Rapid Transit Project in Boston and 6 surrounding cities, a series of MBTA lines that will eventually connect the spokes of Boston's radial transportation system. He also worked on transit projects in New Orleans, New Jersey, and Miami. David has a master's degree in regional planning from UMass Amherst and is a member of the American Planning Association, and he comes to us from Hadley, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Carol. Could I trouble you? I could click through. Actually, that's Jeff's presentation, however, though. While you're finding it, just let me say I'm thrilled to have been invited and to have transportation included in the discussion of smart growth and land use. I think too often we don't bring transportation into the picture. And I think that's changing at the federal level. I know there's a large initiative right now to bring US DOT and housing and urban development together. There's a real movement going on in Washington to make that happen. So I think our charge is how do we make that happen at the regional level? Jessica and I are working on that. And how do we make it happen at the municipal level? So hopefully we can think about that a little bit. I'm going to try and bring to you some just information about the transportation environment in Amherst, and then talk a little bit about developer agreements, the kinds of things that you may want to be thinking about and that other communities have done while new developments have gone in. So I'll just want to slide it back, or this is fine. I can stand through and click here. So I wanted to show this map. I don't know how many of you may have seen this before. It's a subway map of Hampshire County. And obviously, so you can see there's Amherst College and downtown Amherst and Pleasant Street and UMass. So it's right on the red line. Should be easy to get there. I show this just because it makes me smile. It's done by some very creative people over in Northampton called the Transit Authority Figures or something like that. But it just reminds me that transit is kind of a state of mind. Transportation is a state of mind. We do think about our valley and our community in connecting ways like this. And so I just wanted to show this to kind of kick things off and remind us that transit and transportation, it's how close we think we are, as well as how close we actually are to something. This is our real transit map of the region, and Hampshire County on the northern part of the PVTA system there, and the larger southern system. Overall, we have 44 bus routes in the region and about 700 miles serving 24 of the 43 communities in the Pioneer Valley area. The PVTA has a hard job. They have to serve downtown areas like downtown Springfield like this. They have to serve malls like we have out in Hadley, and they have to serve rural roads like you see on the way out to Belchertown. So it's tough because transit works best in densely developed areas. And when you have large disparities, it makes it hard to plan your service. This is the Amherst area. You're probably familiar with how the bus route system looks on the PVTA map. Here's an aerial photo of Amherst, and here we lay on the bus routes. And I've tried to color code them as best as I can, but you can see the blue line coming in on Route 9, that's the blue 43, and then the green route running out to Belchertown. Some of the routes running up to the north, the Puffer's Pond route, the 30 that goes up to Sunderland. I think that's the route. I haven't learned quite all the numbers yet for PVTA. Amherst and UMass are the two big attractions for that system, and all those routes pass through either downtown or the UMass Amherst campus. And that campus is a major generator. You have all those jobs and people concentrated living and working together. That's why bus transit works so well there. You can see we've got close to 30,000 people who are there every day. But we also have one of the shortest commute distances in the state, 7.5 miles or so. And that translates into about, I think it's close to 18 minutes or something is the average commute time. It's a very short commute time compared to the state average, which is over a half hour or so. But you also have 3 out of 4 trips being made to campus in vehicles that are single occupancy vehicles, so one driver per car. So transit would like to get more passengers per car. The joke, how do you double your vehicle's fuel efficiency? Put in a passenger, and you've doubled your efficiency. Buses do that many times over. Here's a little information about bus ridership. It shows we've got in Hampshire County, and these are all the routes serving both Northampton and Amherst, about 416,000 riders a month. And if we do a little guesstimate mathematics and figure out what is that on a daily basis, we figure we have about 16,000 bus trips happening in Hampshire County per day. And so if we think everybody goes somewhere and comes back on the bus, maybe that's 8,000 bus customers per day. What if we compare that to the number of vehicles we have? So if we go back to our map of the bus routes serving Amherst and look at the mass highway traffic counts on those major arteries coming into Amherst Center, you can see we're talking about many-fold more vehicles. It's not an exact comparison here because some people obviously may come in on Main Street and then go up North Pleasant, so they'd get counted twice. But you can see just an order of magnitude, we've got many more cars coming in. So while we have this opportunity of dense development in downtown and at UMass, we also have this problem to fix, or another opportunity in diverting single occupancy vehicles that are coming into town. We also have this great asset in Amherst, the bike system. And this is one of the most bike active communities in the state. And that is really, it's a great achievement, and it's also something that can be built upon. Northampton is investing a lot in their bike system, and I know there's a lot of interest in this community in doing that as well. Real estate becomes more valuable when it's near a bike path. Many of you may know Craig Dellapena, who specializes in properties near bike paths because they're worth more. And it's not only just residential properties, it's commercial properties as well. So unfortunately, I don't have ridership numbers for the bike system. It's hard to know exactly, but DCR is working on a resurfacing project so that the capacity of the existing bike path coming through Hadley will be increased, the safety increased. So definitely we have more bikes in the future. A little statistic, 14% of work trips, this is 2000 census data, so it could be old, one of the highest percentages of bike and pedestrian work trips made on the East Coast. So a lot of opportunity there to keep that going. UMass has looked into this, how to continue to parlay the bike asset. They have their bike master plan, some basic things, but one of the things they are very conscious of is connecting the bike system to other modes of transit. And we've seen great success with the Rack and Roll program up here. It's on most of the buses running in Hampshire County, and PVTA is working on a pilot program to bring it to the Springfield area. So this is really, it's an important kind of beachhead and the intermodal thing that is so important for giving people different choices on how to get places. So in preparing for this, I went back to the Planning Together master plan and looked at where people would take public transportation. And you can see they want to go to the densely developed areas. They want to go to the village centers. They want to come downtown. They want to go shopping. We're not sure if that shopping is downtown or if it's at a mall. But we know that if we're thinking about how land use and transportation work together, it's looking like people are telling us from this community they want to be going to the densely developed areas. And so that's where transit-oriented development works best. And I'm sure you've heard this term, TOD. It is about continuing to develop your existing developed areas. It's about building up, not out. It's about having more transportation choices in those areas, that it's walkable, that you manage the parking in there. And when you say manage parking, it doesn't necessarily mean making parking easier. It's about making people think about whether they really want to drive, or would it be easier to take another form of transportation. And then it's about things that make the area more attractive, quality architecture and good public amenities. Also about mixed-use zoning, having retail on the first floor, residential offices up on the second floor, so that people can live and work in areas where they live in the areas where they work. There we go. And so the general idea of transportation-oriented development in this state is, within a half mile. It's within a half mile of a half mile of a transit node, and a node is usually something more. Can I trouble you to help? There we go. So you're probably familiar with in larger areas, larger urban areas. This is Kendall Square. In Cambridge, you have MIT and lots of development around there. There's a subway station there, and it supports lots of different kinds of development. There's hotels and those sorts of things. This is a proposed TOD district in Westwood, which is in the 495 belt west of Boston. This is where you'd have a major commuter rail station and some Amtrak service in a big parking lot. And you can see they are envisioning a similar mix of retail and office there. So the question Carol posed to me was, what might it look like in Amherst? What would TOD look like? Downtown looks a little TOD-ish right now. We have good bus going down the center of Main Street, but more development like you see here. This is Concord Center. You have, again, the retail. This is immediately adjacent to their rail station. Retail on the first floor and office and residential up on the second. This is Gloucester's commuter rail station. Nice bay windows for display for retail, and then offices and residential up on the upper levels. The train station is barely visible there on the right. And then Newton Center, an older community on the Green Line, higher levels of transit ridership than we see out here. And that's a tough thing about TOD out here, I'll mention in a minute. And an example from Holyoke, they are doing some transportation redevelopment at their old fire station. They're turning it into a bus facility that's, again, going to have that retail on the first floor, and then some daycare on the second floor. And then Holyoke Community College will be doing some adult literacy and things on these third and fourth floors down there. So lots of different mixed uses going on, characteristic of what transportation-oriented development is about. But TOD is best supported. Most TOD happens when you have rail, either subway or commuter rail. Only about 7 or 8% of TOD projects nationwide have bus only, and that is kind of what we'd be limited to in this area. So something to think about. It's certainly the way we need to be going. TOD has been built up in many areas where it has been built up, so we want to expand it out to areas served by bus. So I'll very quickly talk about developer agreements, shifting gear a little bit, but as you think about your smart growth district, what are things you can do working with developers to get the kind of things to mitigate impacts in your community? And Easton, near Brockton, has a very unique set of agreement with a developer there who's putting in a retail and residential development. The agreement they have there is worth well over $2 million. And this is a result of a long process with the community, working with the developer. Not something that you can necessarily negotiate in the permitting process. So a lot of this has to go on through other types of arrangements that make it happen. But you can see some of the things that were important in this community. Open space, redevelopment of a fire station, things of that nature. These are some typical types of mitigation that you see communities working with developers to have enacted as part of projects. And then some local examples nearby. We have out on Route 9, you may not realize it with the problems that we're having with traffic right now on Route 9 in front of the Lowe's construction site. They are actually going to be making traffic better. They've contributed a significant chunk of money to help put in a signal priority system for the buses so the buses can extend the green phase, hopefully making people riding buses move more smoothly through that corridor. Also contribution to agricultural preservation in that town. And I'm just going to close with this information from a study about how transit agencies approach transit-oriented development. In most cases, and you can see, it's the municipality that takes the lead. So I just want to leave you with that thought. I think you're taking a leadership role by having this forum and continuing to pursue the bylaw that you're pursuing. So this is the way it proceeds. So I wish you a lot of luck, and PVPC will be there to support you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to remind the at-home audience that you may call in if you have questions during the question and answer period. And the phone number that you should call in on should be on your screen at home. If it's not, the number is 531-5450, and your question will be written down by the person who answers the phone.
It was getting to overlay some of the slide information.
Ah.
So we just took it off and put it right back as soon as.
Okay, we'll post the number periodically, but not constantly, so it won't interrupt the slides. Okay, thanks very much. So our next speaker and our last speaker is Jeff Lacey. Jeff holds a graduate degree in regional planning and is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. He is the chief environmental planner at the Department of Conservation and Recreation's Quabbin Reservoir Field Office in Belchertown. In that capacity, he provides planning technical assistance to 14 watershed communities. He has worked at the county and state levels of government and as a private consultant in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, New York, and Hawaii, where he was planning director for the island of Kauai. He is a member and past chair of the Zoning Reform Working Group, an organization of land use professionals serving in an advisory capacity to the Massachusetts legislature. Mr. Lacey received the Professional Planner of the Year Award from the Massachusetts chapter of the American Planning Association in 2003, and the Outstanding Planning Project Award from the Hawaii chapter in 1993. He is currently the treasurer of the Adirondack Mountain Club, a conservation and environmental advocacy organization. And Jeff, you may come up here or speak from there, whichever you prefer. You can.
I'll just sort of move around. I'm sort of going to be the.
Why don't you take this?
I'm kind of going to be the plumber of the group because I'm going to deal with a nuts and bolts zoning technique, and very shy on theory and long on details. And while I'm mumbling, maybe the presentation, oh, there it is. Good. This is normally a half-hour plus presentation. I'm going to try to do it in 10 minutes or so. So not all the slides are being shown, but you do have a handout. It's the green one. And this will give you some good information about natural resource protection zoning on the first page, some specifics about how it works in Shutesbury, your neighbor town of Shutesbury, the Shutesbury Design Workshop, which will become meaningful in worksheet, which will become meaningful in a few minutes, and then an overall outline of what Shutesbury did in entirely revamping its zoning. Shutesbury adopted this zoning last year. It was the first town in the Commonwealth to do so. And then last week, Brewster out on the Cape adopted a zoning bylaw, a natural resource protection zoning bylaw, taken directly from Shutesbury. So that was the second town to do it. It is a little different, as you shall see. Next slide. This really, I'm here to deal with kind of the other side of smart growth, the conservation and preservation side, because really having wonderful town centers, villages, growth centers, mixed use, cottage zoning, high density is a very, very good idea. I lived in Amherst Center for 5 years and I loved it. I lived in a 4-story building on the 3rd floor. There were apartments above on the 4th, offices below on the 2nd, and then stores right on the bottom level, the Collective Copies building. It was a wonderful place to live. But that's only going to be a small part of the town. You've got the whole rest of the town to deal with, the hinterland, the farmland, the forest, the watershed, the area where the wild animals live. I mean, these hinterlands have to be taken care of, and I don't think we can just leave our suburban zoning in place. 1 and 2 acre suburban zoning surrounding good smart growth zoning district is not really going to get you anywhere. It's going to get you smart growth centers surrounded by a sea of 1, 2, and 3 acre residential housing. And that's not the kind of outcome that I think many communities envision. Hence, we've developed a technique that can be employed in those hinterlands, and we call it natural resource protection zoning. This is a little ad from a real estate magazine around here, and I think it's kind of interesting because it says, beautiful 2¼ acre open building lot with mountain views, formerly rich farmland. Grow an awful lot on 2¼ acres of rich farmland. But we see this kind of thing happening all the time around here. Next. Sometimes you get lucky, as in Montague. This 15-acre field was protected, but at great cost and great effort over a couple of years. Next. Most land that's destined for development is not going to be protected. It is going to be developed. And many communities, in an effort to preserve their rural character and natural resources, simply up the lot size. They go from a ½ acre to 1 acre to 2 to 3. This is 3 acre zoning out in Oakham. And they did it to preserve their countryside. And this is the result when a developer actually took them up on it. Next slide. And 5 acre zoning. This is the conservation district in Chester, New York, where I grew up. This used to be a horse farm. I worked here in the summers chasing broodmares around. Town thought it was a worthy place to protect, so they slapped 5-acre lots on this area, and this is the result. Next slide, please. And you add it all up, parcel by parcel, over many years, and we achieved sprawlscapes like this one just a little bit south of here in the Connecticut River Valley. Next slide. Cluster zoning is often posited as a solution, and cluster works to an extent. This is a cluster development in Rutland, Massachusetts. Some of the open space is up in the front. This is probably one of the largest developable parts of open space that exist here. The rest of it are river valleys and ravines and wetlands and peripheral lands around the subdivision. I show this, I mean, I'm very familiar with this. I wrote the bylaw in the 90s that this is based on. It's a cluster bylaw. And it improves the subdivision a little bit, but it doesn't really preserve meaningful blocks of resource land. Next slide. This is a cluster in Belchertown, Dana Woods. Very nice little project. There's a 3-acre common in the middle. It's kind of like a park with grass and trees, and modest middle-income housing surrounding. Wonderful place to live and bring up your kids. It's a cluster. It's a great amenity, but that's really where it ends. This is not farmland. It's not forest land. This doesn't have real ecological value. It's a better subdivision, and that's what you often get with cluster, a better subdivision. Next slide. So when Shutesbury finished its master plan in '04, and we on the planning board, I'm on the Shutesbury planning board, started looking around for a way to implement the master plan recommendation that we needed to preserve our large blocks of contiguous forest land in Shutesbury. That was a major recommendation. And we looked around for tools, and we found them lacking. So we kind of invented a new tool, and it took about 4 years to develop. And this is what we call it. And here is the pedigree. This is where it comes from. It does have some similarity to cluster zoning, because in the end there is permanent conservation land. It has some similarity to large lot zoning because it's based on very low densities, actually much lower than anything we've seen in Massachusetts so far. And the methodology we took from Pennsylvania and Maryland, something called fixed area ratio zoning, where developability is determined based on area and not road frontage. And that's a major difference. You just don't pay any attention to road frontage, you pay attention to area. And we'll see how that plays out. We put all that together, and that's where it came from. Next slide. So some common elements. Click to the next one. It's offered by right. It's the easy way to do things. Next. In conventional development is by special permit. You can't do a conventional subdivision in Shutesbury unless you secure a special permit. You can do a natural resource protection development by right. So we kind of flip that dynamic where the thing you really want is now easiest, and what you don't want, they have to beg for. Next slide. Very low density for Massachusetts anyway. We're talking 5 to 10 acres per dwelling unit in Shutesbury. Next slide. Development rights are, a little ahead here. Development rights are calculated by formula. Often in cluster development, a yield plan is generated. It's a conventional plan. Everybody fights about that to figure out how many units can be developed. Here there's a simple formula, and if you have basic mapped information about a piece of land, you can figure out developability in about 15 minutes. And that's that worksheet that's on the handout, the third page of the worksheet. Substantial open space preservation, in the ones we're working on so far, 65 to 90% is the range of preservation, and this is with every project. Next. The conservation analysis and findings process, this helps the planning board and the applicant sort out where the homes are going to go versus where the preserved open space is going to go. Next. Much greater design flexibility in the developed areas. Once the number of units are determined, The area that can be developed is determined. There are no lot sizes. There are no frontages, and there are no setbacks for the development that occurs in that area. We have folks that really want to do some co-housing, traditional neighborhood design in Shutesbury, and this fits their needs perfectly. Next slide. Diversity of housing types. All the housing types available in Shutesbury: single-family, two-family, accessory apartments, three-family, and four-family are all available in these projects. Next. Shared driveways are encouraged versus the use of subdivision roadways. Even up to 6 units can be served by a shared driveway by special permit instead of building subdivision roadway. Next. Earned density bonus options for providing affordable housing, public access, or dedicating extra open space beyond the minimum. Next. A transfer development rights option to bring in additional development rights even from remotely located parcels. Next. And a flexible frontage option, which is something that I'm not going to talk about tonight because I'm running out of time. Next slide. Here's an example. This one we call the 100-acre wood. This is the pre-scene. Town Road runs along here, some A&R development. The house and barn here with an open field. This is a separate piece of property. Mostly forested, steep in the middle, trail coming in from off the property, stream and wetlands at the bottom. Next slide. This is Shutesbury's old zoning. This is exactly what you could do under the old zoning. It's 2-acre zoning, 250 feet of frontage. You'll get 34 units. Next slide. This is the NRPZ approach. And actually, this one shows 14 units on about 25% of the property. Leaving 75% open. The trail remains. The field doesn't need to be developed. Some of the frontage is not developed. Large block of open space development located quite a ways from the wetland and the stream. Next slide. This shows, now that one showed going from 34 to 14 units. That's a reduction in units. This one shows an increase in units. This is we call it the small farm. There's a farm over here. It's got some more property over there. This is the house and barn, existing situation. Next slide. The NRPZ would allow them to add 3 more units off of a shared driveway here, 2 more units here, and that would be done. The rest of the property would be conserved. And the idea here was under current conditions, you go one back. Current condition, this is not really a readily developed piece of land. The roadway's too long, they're out of frontage, can't really do a subdivision, so they don't have many options. Next slide. Here they get 5 additional units and the property is conserved. Next slide. What that does is that avoids this ultimate scenario where perhaps the property changes hands, a developer gets a hold of it, loop road goes in, and 22 units of housing are ultimately built there. Next slide. This is one from Wendell. Wendell is going to apply this technique to A&R development as well. Here's a 4-unit A&R with an existing house. Next slide. This is the NRPZ alternative. Can you go back a little bit? I know you want me to go fast, but I can't go quite that fast. Here, about 5 acres is used for the development. 9 or 10 are preserved around it. There's room in the center for community gardens, greenhouses, a gazebo. The owner, who actually lives in this house, was so excited about this plan, he's going to build it whether they pass the bylaw or not, by hook or by crook, because he really likes it. This is a nice little project. Next slide. Okay, basic formulas. We'll go through these really fast. Next. Dwelling units. Next. Take the gross project area, the whole area, subtract all or part of the constrained lands, the wetlands, the slopes, things like that. Next, divide by the selected divisor. In Shutesbury, it's 5. It can be other things. Next, add in any density bonuses or TDRs. Next, and there you go. That's the maximum number of dwelling units. Next slide. The preserved land. Next. Take the gross parcel area again. Next. Multiply by the required percentage, whatever is selected. Add additional land from bonuses, TDRs, if any. Next. And that's the minimum acreage of preserved land. Last one, developable land, again, the whole project. Next, subtract the preserved land from the last calculation, and that equals the maximum acreage of developable land. So here they are all together for dwelling units, preserved land, developable land. That's page 3 in your handout. That's how we figured that all out. We've figured out many properties that way so far. It's really very easy. The blue ones are the kind of things that are really important because these numbers are going to dictate how the results turn out. How much constrained land you subtract right from the get-go. The selected divisor, whether that's 3, 5, 7.5, 10, that's a big deal. And then the required percentage of open space. And all these numbers work together. You can't really change one or two without affecting the others. So you have to kind of calibrate these until you get the results you want. Next. And we're done. This is my information, and Joel Russell was my collaborator on this. Joel is a land use attorney and planning consultant from Northampton. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. We're going to have question and answers now. People. The call-in number, again, for people calling in at home is 531-5450. And if you're watching a replay of this, if you're not watching on October 27th, don't call in because no one's here. Peggy Roberts will handle the question and answer period.
Questions from the audience? Yes.
Yeah. Would anyone of you?
Wait, we need a microphone.
No. Why do I need a microphone? Oh, it's for TV. Thanks. Let's see. Are any of you interested or knowledgeable about real estate taxes and their impact on smart growth? The reason I'm asking the question is that there are these magazines called Best Places to Retire and America's Best Places to Live, that sort of thing. And Amherst never makes it. And I am told that the reason is because of the high cost of living, which is a product of high real estate taxes. We're about double those of our neighboring community, Hadley. Just about everyone agrees in various forms that we need more commercial development. But my question is, to go with smart growth, are there anything like smart tax policies? I mean, you know, real estate taxes seem to govern just about everything we do and everything we don't do. And what, aside from, you know, just tax abatement or transfer of development rights, are there any other communities that have used real estate tax policies in a creative way that could help us out?
Well, I won't probably give you the answer that you're looking for, other than to say that I agree. It's a huge problem underlying near the struggles that nearly every municipality is dealing with in the state of Massachusetts, and the heavy reliance on property taxes creates a perverse dynamic where essentially commercial development is sought out actively by most municipalities because they want the revenue to pay for their, to close the gaps in their municipal budgets. And at the same time, they're playing defense against families because they don't want any additional services or burden on that budget. And that's really perverse when you think about it. Unfortunately, I think it's probably beyond the scope of, solving that problem is beyond the scope of what any one individual municipality can do. I know the legislature is actually hosting a series of hearings about this exact issue, and I think they want to do something about it. It's probably more of a medium-term effort, though.
Actually, would high taxes and high real estate costs be working towards smart development?
would encourage smaller development, more toward, smaller square footage is less taxable value. So yes, you're right there. Speaking from the regional planning agency perspective, what you've raised, I think, points up the fact that the issue of how do we care for all parts of our community may be in some respects regional. And we need to start thinking about beyond the home rule mindset that has for so long really governed New England, and think about new approaches to revenue sharing on a regional scale. It's been done with some effectiveness in the Midwest. In Minnesota, there's a revenue sharing approach that goes on at the county level. And out west, some cities are so large as to be counties themselves. And so I think that is one way to begin moving towards solving what you raise as a real problem.
From the conservation and preservation standpoint, we see some problems in the way agricultural and rural lands are assessed, especially if there's quite a bit of frontage. And if the assessors regard all of that frontage as building lots, even if it's not divided up as such, that can be a real problem for that landowner if they have no intention of creating building lots. The tax burden may hasten that outcome. Could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we urge assessors to work within the DOR guidelines to the greatest degree possible and assess that at current use rather than potential use.
I wonder if I could go first. Since I got the mic, I'll come right back to you. Have any of you ever heard about a PURG?
What about
What?
a what?
PURG. Well, we have such a thing in Amherst. Wait a minute.
Stands for Planned Unit Residential Development. It's
Yes.
We all live on a quarter acre of land and are surrounded
Yes.
by open spaces.
Yes.
Okay, I just was wondering because I
The first
started
one in-
listening and I said, that's where I live.
Yeah. You had the first one in the state, I believe.
Yes, we were.
Built in the 60s and has pretty much been the model for cluster development in other communities as well.
Actually, 72, I think it
72.
finally. They built some other pieces of it, but yeah.
That Echo Hill, Harry?
Echo Hill.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Yep.
Which you did a study on, correct? Yeah.
No, it will.
I have a question for Jeff, and if I was thinking about the formula that you were talking about, I don't know if this is on. It is. Okay. I don't know if the formulas that you had highlighted in blue, are all of those negotiable, the percentage of open space that is written into that development? Or does the town basically set the caps or the limits as a rule and then apply it to every development that comes along?
The way it's set up in this bylaw, those numbers, those critical numbers are set in the bylaw because this is a by right technique. A developer needs to be able to come in, read the bylaw, read the numbers, and do it, be able to actually do it. We did throw in a special permit, though, for any deviation from the bylaw. So because we know that we can't imagine every scenario, every piece of property, every proposal. So we have a special permit whereby if a developer wants to propose another number, and in exchange for that will preserve an extraordinary piece of land or a natural landmark, or will do something else that the town recognizes to be a public benefit, then you can issue a special permit and grant that flexibility. But otherwise, you have to figure out those numbers in advance so that it's clear. But I spent two and 3 years negotiating with W.D. Coles about what those numbers should be, and that's what you'll argue about, is what those numbers should be.
Mm-hmm. So the range of 65 to 90% is something, though, that you do fix ahead of time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. 65% is what we is what we have for a preservation standard within close proximity to town roads, 80% is for the backland, when you get way away from the roads, and 90% is something that Joel and I put into a regulation we wrote in the Adirondacks, where the densities are very, very low.
Jessica, this is a question for you, and you said that Amherst did not accept the MOA that you offered them.
Mm-hmm.
And could you tell me about what time that would be and what town bodies that was against it, so that
Sure.
someone could
We
go back
met
and
with all
research that?
43 communities. We met with the select board because they are the chief elected officials, or the mayors in some cases. We also met with the planning boards in every community. So those were the two main entities that we met with. It was around 2007. We worked on the MOA for a couple of years. So I believe there were 2 meetings with the select board. I'm not sure how many meetings with the planning board. I believe you have new people on those boards now at this time as well. So the people who might have been resistant in 2007 may no longer be there.
I never heard anything about it.
Oh, okay.
I had a question for David about extending bike paths. I know Northampton, I think, has 5 new bike paths in the works, and I don't know if they're doing it with Community Preservation Act funds, but I know a lot of communities are doing that, purchasing the easements and then actually creating the trails with CPA funds. I was just wondering if there are communities that are thinking about the whole town, like how to grid the whole town for bike use, and do you know of any models that are doing that, and how would one go about that?
I'm unfortunately not our bike expert at the Planning Commission, but Amherst is doing a very good job. And I think with the assistance of the Mass Bike Pioneer Valley chapter and James Lowenthal's work, to really get an assessment of which roads, and you may recall on that map that I showed, there are principal routes and then there's alternate routes. So there's definitely an assessment going on, and I think Cambridge is also doing a lot of work with bike lanes, but I'm not aware of something maybe to the degree that you're talking about.
I'm curious, going from our master plan, which is very close to being accepted, how we go from the obvious citizen concern about keeping open spaces, realizing that density is important, and it's wonderful as a big goal. But when you start talking about implementation, I think village centers may be a place where we will be successful first. Downtown density is certainly something that has to happen, because we can't really grow our downtown except up. Infill there means up, essentially, because downtown is downtown. And we can't go into residential areas without disruption. There's sort of no place to go. But how do you go from a goal to a real change in how people think? This is tough. Anybody had any
in terms of talking about
experience?
density? Is that what you're referring to?
Getting people to accept that real density is necessary if we're going to preserve large areas. Planned unit developments are chopping the land up into ecologically areas that don't work, much too small. But has anyone had any experience with communities that have had to struggle with this?
I'd say, first of all, you're very lucky that you have a downtown that's so vibrant and you don't have vacant buildings or underutilized buildings, which is usually the first things that you look for in infill development. So you should feel blessed that your downtown is as vibrant as it is. And But I think when you're talking about density, it can be a scary term. It's something we see a lot. You just mentioned the term density, and people panic about what that might mean. Coming from a landscape architecture degree, I truly believe that having visualizations is a huge part of trying to convey the message of density. I mean, just having Jeff in his visualizations tonight with his zoning concept, I think, can show people what you're talking about. And there's a lot of different resources out there. In fact, in his PowerPoint presentation, there were some websites that I actually jotted down that I hadn't seen yet that can showcase what different smart growth developments can look like. There's a book called Visualizing Density by Julie, I can't remember. Yes. And it's fantastic because what it does is it actually shows you what different development scenarios look like at 2 acres, 4 acres, 10 acres, 20 acres per unit. And you can see visually what those different densities look like. And I think that's a huge help for folks, just being able to visualize it and see it and understand it rather than just look at it in terms of numbers and data and zoning and just words. But that's my opinion. I don't know if somebody else is a different one. Question?
Sure.
I had a couple questions. One is for Jeff. I know you know a lot about water issues, and we in the 70s and 80s, Amherst developed a phased growth bylaw. Partly, my understanding is, it was based on water concerns, scarcity of water, things like about how growth would affect water supplies. At any rate, could you talk a little bit about smart growth as it relates to water issues and conservation issues? And then someone had mentioned, before all of you leave, if you could each say your websites so that people could learn more about that, learn more about what you do from those. Thanks.
I think smart growth has a lot to do with sustainable outcomes and pacing growth so that it's sustainable as it goes, and that's perhaps where phase growth comes in. I have a little bit of a problem with phase growth as a be-all and end-all, because if your ultimate pattern is not what you want, simply pacing it out just means you're going to get to an undesirable outcome a little bit later. And maybe that's fine because you won't be around to see it. But so I think phasing is fine. It has its place. It's currently very limited in Massachusetts now. There was a court case called Zuckerman versus Hadley that kind of threw out most development phasing, building permit issuance limitations and things like that. And what that case says is you can do that for short periods of time, but you have to be working on solutions to the problems and actively working on solutions. And whatever you do in the way of phased growth has to have an end point. You've got to let go of it after you've worked for a few years on those problems, and you can't keep it in place indefinitely. So phased growth has its place, but I think during the time when you're actually utilizing the mechanisms, you should be developing zoning that for the long term is something you can live with.
Just to jump in on the previous question about how do you sustain a community vision, because I think that's very important, and it gets back to what I was hammering on around figuring out how to tell your story, because if you have a master plan, very few people are going to read it. You need to really have a way of talking about it that people can connect with, that makes it real for them. And so I would spend some time thinking about that. And again, some visualizations can be very helpful. Having one thing that's happened in a number of places that I would recommend, if possible, if there's enough sort of energy around it, is to create, it doesn't have to be called this, but perhaps a design center, a community design center. Essentially what I mean by that is a public-private partnership, Could be just volunteers, doesn't have to be any kind of a institutionalized body, but it could just be a group of people who are helping to steward the plan or the vision. And what they could be doing are activities that are just educating, holding forums like this, taking, going to meet with fraternal organizations and presenting, telling that story about the community and getting further feedback and buy-in, creating materials, maybe even a branding of some kind. That's all, I think, very helpful. Remember that zoning by itself is not very fun. So if you could make your events fun, then that would be a good start. If you could get a design center together where you have a regular social gatherings where it's actually enjoyable to come and learn about these things, bring in speakers, have people who don't in the town who don't ordinarily get a chance to talk about these issues in a non-threatening environment, give them the opportunity to do that, because it's those personal relationships that are going to overcome the personal adversity at the local level. Oh, one final question for Jeff. Why did you come back from Hawaii?
Crappy skiing.
And it's on.
Question on state law. I know, at least in the past, things that the town has wanted to do have been hampered pretty much by state law. And I wonder what progress is being made on updating the Massachusetts law relative to real estate and development.
The Zoning Act, or which one of
That
you
was
want to take
teed up,
it?
Jeff. Yeah, do you wanna
Okay, well, thank you for that one. Actually, Andre and I are both up to our eyeballs in those issues. I've been involved for a long time with the Zoning Reform Working Group, which authored the Community Planning Act, CPA 2. Andre's group has been involved with the administration for a couple of years, authoring the Land Use Partnership Act, LUPA. Both of those bills were heard in May at a joint hearing, all-day hearing, and have been with the Municipalities and Regional Government Committee ever since. And that's a very good committee. It's in the 10 years I've been at this, it's the best committee that zoning reform legislation has been in. It's got a very involved chair, although he's been sidelined with an injury for the last 3 or 4 weeks or so things have bogged down a little bit. But he's got good staff that know the issues, and it's a very good committee. And they have indicated that they're going to put out a bill, that the bill is not going to go to study, they're going to do something. And it is probably going to be a hybridized version of the two of those bills. And I would say probably in the most general terms, it's going to be a bill that's going to have a number of statewide reforms that all communities get, and it's going to have another suite of reforms that are so-called opt-in measures, that communities who wish to opt into the state program develop a plan and meet some goals around housing, open space, things like that. Then they'll get additional reforms coming their way. It's probably going to be a bill something like that, and we'll see how it goes. It's been reported to be on track to come out before the holidays, so I hope it does.
It's gonna be a slog. So if you're interested at all, feel free to find out more. Contact Jeff or I.
Any other questions? One thing that comes to mind thinking about growing up in Southern California, living for a little while in England, a little while in Germany, and here, I think the idea that when land is developed, it's developed. And it's very hard to get it back and redo it or turn it back to its original state. I think one of the biggest problems we face in this country is looking at short-term land use. It's very hard in other countries to do the kind of massive development, and they have more space left, more green space, more agricultural land intact. So it's not easy to do smart growth. Smart growth is when we think of the future, I think. Any other questions?
Well, can I just address that real
Yeah.
quick and say that I agree, but Americans aren't willing to accept the levels of densities that they do in Europe. And as a result, I mean, you can't have no growth. And so we're left with a muddling through and a middle ground, which I think is unappealing for most people, because we're not willing to accept, an urban and rural model, which is what they do in Europe. You know, we are a suburban country, and we defend that. Many people defend that. So it's really about changing the culture of the way we think about these things. We have to be willing to accept density in certain locations and grow in certain places. And the other thing I would just say about Europe is that I was talking to a regional planner from Barcelona and a few months ago, and he horrified me by unrolling he's a transportation planner of the regional transportation plan for Greater Barcelona, which had incredible, immense numbers of new roadways and highways all over it. And he was actually surprised that in Massachusetts we are not building big new roadways, and that he feels that in some ways, we have turned a corner. So we just can't idealize any one particular situation, because there is a strong drive even in other places of the world towards this, low density type of development.
And it certainly makes the transportation issues very, very difficult. I worry about the hill towns. How can you ever possibly service the hill towns?
That's true, especially when we have so few resources available for transportation, especially the kind of transportation that carries more than one person at a time.
One question. Yes, she wanted me to remind you, would you mention your website first?
Sure.
Could you do that?
Yes, www.ma-smartgrowth.org. And I would say that I've been at the Alliance for 2 years, and I haven't touched the website yet. And we have a new one coming out within a month, so maybe you should wait.
It's pvpc.org.
Same for me.
That's just an email address. Yeah. That's just an email address. No. Call me and I'll...
I'd just like to say one thing. I came down here from Burlington, Vermont. Can you think of a nicer place to come from? I thought I'd never leave there, and when I came down, they offered me a job, and the person brought me down and said, will you promise me a year? I said, I'll promise you 2. I've been here for 34. He left a long time ago.
I'd like to thank the speakers tonight. I think there are lots of issues that Amherst is on the verge of having to face. And I would like very much for those of you who were here tonight to fill out the evaluation form. We like to know how these events have been received. And those of you on ACTV watching broadcasts, there is a let's see, we have evaluation forms on the town meeting coordinating website that you could fill out. And if you think of subjects that you would like to have us cover in the future, backgrounds for things that are coming up in town, so please do fill out the forms. And remember, town meeting starts on Monday, November 2nd. The last precinct meeting, I believe, is tomorrow. And ACTV has been rebroadcasting the warrant review. The bus tour for town meeting members is just now up. And if you go to ACTV program for Channel 17, the times are listed, and also they're all available on demand. So again, thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you for the invitation.